Good evening. Good evening, all. Good evening, British Virgin Islands. Good evening to all of you out there in social media land. I am Rhonda Victor Pinnock, your Mrs. British Virgin Islands Globe 2024. Now, during the month of October, as you all know, we recognize gender based violence, or what most persons refer to as domestic violence. Now, as Miss British Virgin Islands, this happens to be my platform. And as a WIN ambassador, I have pledged to shine as much light as I can on this critical issue that has been affecting our society. So this presentation, my platform, is being powered by WINBVI. We want to thank them for being on board and supporting this great initiative, shedding light on this societal scourge that has crippled many persons, not only in the Virgin Islands, but beyond in the entire world. All right. So tonight, what we're going to do, we're going to have a discussion, an engaging discussion on gender-based violence, where we're going to be uniting voices on this critical issue. But gender-based violence is a community issue, and we have persons from different institutions that are on board here tonight and is ready and willing to share their knowledge and expertise with you. Now, just a brief introduction of who they are. We're going to come back to them a little later on and hear their perspective on this issue. We have Mr. Kendall Bob, Inspector Kendall Bob, who works with the Family and Juvenile Unit at the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force. We have Attorney Stacy Abel, and we have Dr. Albert Tompkins, who works with the Family Support Network Unit. So there we have persons from different backgrounds, from different institutions, to show that collaboration on this issue is very vital. All right. So this pervasive issue has affected men and women. It has affected our family unit, and that is why it is important to have this collaborative effort, this collaboration, so that we can help victims. And during this presentation tonight, you can expect that we will identify different forms of gender-based violence, noting that gender-based violence is a wide category. But the three main types of gender-based violence we're going to focus on are psychological violence, emotional violence, and physical violence. Again, please note that they're a broad category, but just those three we'll be focusing on. So we'll be able to identify how those types of violence affects us as a community, us as a people, and the family. We're going to look at different ways in which we can seek help. Persons who are faced with such issues sometimes may tend to feel alone and feel that no one cares and it is their fault. So we're going to look at different institutions that are available to assist persons who may be going through such a dilemma. And we're going to look at ways in which we can identify if we are faced with such dilemma. But again, sometimes persons may go through it and they themselves don't know, but it is important for our family and friends to know and identify those signs in their friends or family members when they see those signs occurring. So this discussion tonight is not only for persons who are going through such issues, but friends and loved ones. If you care about your loved one, want to know, care about their well-being, you want the best for them, tune into this interactive discussion forum, and we're going to shed some light on this issue. So we're going to collaborate. Lots of collaboration will be going on amongst the different institutions that we have represented here, but we're going to bring awareness and understanding. It is important to first educate so that we can understand. So we'll have lots of education going on here. So with gender-based violence, it is important to know that sometimes it is passed down from generation to generation. We as a family unit, we as a society must be very, very mindful of this. Sometimes simply by telling our young boys, that only girls should do a certain sport. So, you know, girls, only boys are allowed to play a certain sport or do certain things. Even we as adults, we have gender reveal parties. We prefer a specific sex of person over another sex because of maybe our fears in life, which cripples us and therefore has a ripple effect in our community, resulting again in gender based violence. So, education is very important, and we're going to be doing again lots of that tonight with our well versed panel. All right. So let me go back to the three forms of violence that we will be highlighting tonight. Those are emotional, which tends to attack persons where perpetrators are attacked using words to make them feel less than who they actually are. Whereas physical violence, we have the beating, the thumping, affecting the physical body, which results can be seen where you can see that this person is using a specific makeup or whatever it is, tactic to cover up their physical scars. Whereas emotional, psychological violence now, we have that form of violence where scars may not be totally visible, where persons tend to suffer in silence, tend to believe what the perpetrator is saying, and the perpetrator makes these persons feel less than who they are, making them out to believe that they are someone or something that they would like them to be. Again, we must be very mindful of these signs if we are being victims of gender-based violence, or even if you yourself, you have loved ones who are going through such trauma. So it is very important to know those signs, and we have the panel again who will go through those in detail. So I'm going to turn you over now to our first panelist, who is Mr. Kendall Bob, Inspector Kendall Bob, my apologies, from the Family and Juvenile Unit of the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force.
Yes, good evening to everyone out there listening to a well said topic by Uranda. It's such a time that we always come together around this time, November, to speak on the topic of gender based violence, in particular to domestic violence. However, I always believe it's something for me each and every day because I see it from where I'm sitting. So tonight, I'm just going to speak to you where gender based violence, as Rwanda said earlier, is a global issue. But I more want to speak about what is happening right here in our territory. So, again, my name is Kendall Bob. I'm a detective inspector of the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force, and I'm presently the supervisor of the Family and Juvenile, a specialized unit that deals with all cases of gender-based violence. So I have several training, several experience over the last 17 years plus of dealing with investigating and managing these cases. So for us here in the BVI, it is troubling some because most of our reports that I see on a daily basis comes as domestic violence. When I checked our database, domestic violence is one of the reports that plagues us very often. And we do utilize our resources in terms of training officers quite often to deal with these sensitive matters because we see cases of uh, assault occasionally bodily harm, serious assaults, rape, all these cases that comes to us on a daily basis. So I'm gonna just give some time to speak more about them in terms of where our statistics is all about. So it is said globally, um, gender-based violence against women and girls is a global pandemic that affects 1 in 3 women in their lifetime Globally, as many as 38% of murders of women are committed by an intimate partner. Approximately 55% of women and girls in Guyana have experienced intimate partner violence. Approximately 44% of women and girls in Trinidad and Tobago experience intimate partner violence, and 48% of women, girls in Suriname have experienced intimate partner violence. So, to bring us close to home in the BVI, I will share some statistics for the last between 2019 up to this time of August of 2024. And as Rhonda said, and let me be clear, that the issue is not only with the sex of female or the gender of female, it's also males are affected by gender-based violence, particularly domestic violence. So in 2019, we are now seeing men are now becoming to reported cases of domestic violence. And I have seen a dramatic increase of 28% of men reporting in comparison to females, 72%. In 2020, we saw a decrease of men, which was 26%, and 74% female. And I believe that increase would have come at a time when we had our lockdowns, when it was COVID in 2020, where especially men could not have gone out, because I'm seeing the reports, they are there, could not have gone out to, be with their other halves, so to speak. So they are home, and we have responded to several reports of domestic violence within that household. In 2021, there was a decrease of 63% of females reported, and again, a spike in male of 37%. In 2022, 29% male and 71% female. In 2023, 27% male reported and 73% female cases reported. 36% male so far this year up to August, and 64% female. So in all these cases, we are seeing the gender disparity. More so female are more affected by domestic violence. And I can say that based on reported cases, because there's a tendency, based on my studies, that men do not normally reported case of domestic violence for many of reasons. And most times men will tell you that simply because the reason why I'm not reporting is because the police are not listening. Now, 20, 30 years ago, we could have had that conversation. But during the past 10 years or so since we have our new Domestic Violence Act, the police are now trained to deal with all cases across the board. Whether you're male, whether you're female, a boy or girl, we are to deal with all reports and make sure we are doing so professionally and impartially. So the excuse of not reporting because the police does not listen is a no-no for me. And there are other reasons, as I said, why males are not reporting, simply because domestic violence is a shameful and embarrassing situation where we as men do not believe we should report, that our partners, whether our wives or girlfriends, should come to the police and make report of such. So we are encouraging men across all sector to always report and make sure that the police are able to deal with your matter. Most of these cases are physical abuse in the sense where skin are broken, and it is important for police to utilize all stakeholders involved. When I said stakeholders, law enforcement, medical services, social services, and also the Director of Public Prosecution so that we can bring all perpetrators held accountable for all these reports. Our tendency is to make sure that we protect and safeguard all victims at all times. That is our focus, to protect and safeguard victims and other persons, including children, elderly, and other vulnerable groups within any household, and then hold um, perpetrators accountable for their actions. So I think it is high time that I can turn over to someone else and we can continue the conversation at this time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Inspector Bob, for that overview. I have a question just for query's sake, just for curiosity's sake. You said officers are trained. Can you possibly give us a brief idea, a brief overview of how this is done? I'm asking this because as a society, we are sensitized or we are trying to become desensitized, but I don't think we're quite there as yet. Being that gender-based violence is kind of new on the scene for us, since we were raised in a society where males were given a certain stipulation to say of how they should behave, how they should act. So, in what ways are the police officers trained so that they become neutral in the decision when dealing with a situation of gender-based violence or domestic violence?
Yes, very good question. So officers, from time you enter the force up to where they are at this present moment, must be aware of the Domestic Violence Act. Domestic Violence Act, which was passed in 2011, all officers must be aware of what the act says, especially in the services that are provided there in terms of their role and responsibilities. And simply because families are involved, we do tend to do annual training, which myself and particular officers involved in training, sensitize officers, refresh them based on our policy, our in-house policy. So first of all, we have a national protocol that was derived from the Act, where all stakeholders, in terms of their role and responsibilities, so officers are aware of their roles and responsibility. I can safely say that we are the only stakeholder so far has a policy or guidance in terms of how we respond to reports, where we treat victims, and we investigate the matter with due sensitivity. So they are trained in terms of two officers or more to respond to domestic violence, treat the victims with uttermost empathy, and make sure that they are at a safe place when responding to these reports, and also to arrest perpetrators who have committed acts of violence against such person. So that in-house training based on our policy yearly, sometimes twice a year, we do so to all officers, including subordinates and supervisors, to make sure that we are doing the right thing. I am not here to tell you that we are 100% perfect, but we strive on a daily basis to do what is necessary to make sure that persons are reach and being treated the way that they need to be treated so we can arrest this epidemic domestic violence that is being perpetrated.
All right. Thank you very much for that very great answer. So persons can know that we're getting there. We're getting there as a community. So, if persons out there would like to know what their rights are, I guess that would be the basic human rights that we're all entitled to. Are there any additional rights that persons may need to know when it comes to gender-based violence, where it shows that men and women are indeed equal and there's no segregation? Is there any specific right in the Constitution or any other law book that you have that shows that there is no disparity between the two?
So the public must be aware that the highest piece of legislation within our territory is the Constitution. And the
Okay.
Constitution has laid out persons' fundamental rights, where they are to be treated with respect and dignity. No one has the right to violate or mistreat them, such as, um, you know, cause any harm against them, beating them for whatever reasons. So they have a right to make a report to the police to make sure that the police deals with such person. And we have other pieces of legislations that can assist, and it is our policy that everyone has that fundamental rights and belief to know that they should be treated with respect, whether from their partner within the family, to make sure that they are not mistreated at any cost.
All right. Thank you very much again. One more question. Is there any specific organization that you would collaborate with in order to assist you in dealing with this issue? Persons come to the police. Who do you liaison with? Who do you refer them to for additional assistance? So that our community members know that, hey, there is help. You do not have to be alone. You do not have to suffer in this silence. What are some organizations that you collaborate with?
So I guess you are speaking about other stakeholders involved.
Yes.
And we do have the social services available, such as social development, the family support network, WINBVI, and I believe Zanta, can't remember the correct name at this moment. These are persons or institutions. Some of them are NGOs, some of them are governmental agencies that we reach out to provide the necessary service in terms of counseling, whatever support victims may need in terms of a shelter, food, or whatever monetary assistance they may need in order, to get over the situation of domestic violence.
As police officers, do you guys face any challenges? What are some challenges that you may have with the law or even with a victim themselves when you come to deal with a case to ensure that there's fairness and transparency? What are some challenges you face as police officers when addressing domestic violence or gender based violence?
Well, the law is clear. The law is clear. There are guidance when the law is concerned, but we do sometimes face challenges. Especially, what I will say to you is that, from my experience, most victims, especially persons who are intimate partners, couples, especially those who are married, most times they do not appreciate the police involvement, such as when it comes to arrest and take persons before the court, simply because they do not want their partners to be arrested and charged or taken to prison. So what they do most times is reach out to us for that help, for that safety, for that protection. And if the police recognize criminalities there, at any crime scene, it is our duty to take the necessary action to arrest and remove the perpetrator and possibly charge. So most victims will say to us, we do not want that to happen. We just want you to um, give a serious warning to such person, and then we do so. What we tend to find, because of that, perpetrator most times feel more empowered and wanted to repeat the same actions that they would have um, done in the first place. So we now have to go back to a scene with the same persons that we just deal with whether a week or two before. So it's a repeated cycle. So what we do is that we most times try our best to take these matters before the court and make sure these matters reach before the magistrate so both parties can be able to have their matters settled so that at the end of the day, the police will not looked at to say that we never take the necessary actions that was supposed to. So officers are encouraged when there are evidence of a crime being perpetrated to remove the perpetrator and possibly charge such person.
Okay. So, another question, sorry. Just so inquisitive minds, I know persons out there may be thinking the same thing. I know we have the legal aspect of this coming up, but oftentimes we hear that the police has no choice or the legal persons have no choice but to give the perpetrator whatever penalty they deserve. But then oftentimes, if we're real, we see that persons still get away with it. We still see persons coming back together, or persons are still living in fear of their lives because of this violence that is penetrated towards them. I know we have, for example, the protective order. How effective is that? And how often does persons in the community really utilize this piece of work that the police has? Or I think maybe that would be a law question. But how often does the police engage or have issues with persons coming back together after you have worked so hard to quote unquote help that person, but then you see maybe your hard work went down the drain because there it goes again, and there you have to deal with the issue again. How frustrating can this be?
So as I just explained to you about some of the difficulty and based on what you just said, um, the role of the police is not to get involved of choices that people make.
Okay.
So in other words, if if a man beat a woman today and she decide to go back in a relationship with that person, that should not become a big concern for the police. Our job, our role is to deal with the crime, to investigate the crime, deal with what being before us so that we can always protect persons from any form of abuse. Now, we are not in the business of counseling or anyone. That is not our job. Our job is to deal with the crime, the physical abuse. You may notice that I haven't speak much about the psychological and emotional
Yes.
because this is a difficult area, especially for law enforcement. As you said earlier, um, these type of abuse are not visible for us to see. So what I do most times to encourage persons when they are going through these type of abuse, psychological and emotion, is to record, and then we can seek the help, especially from my good friend Dr. Tompkinson, in terms of the psychiatric treatment or counseling that victims may need. And to the extent also, um, persons will come to the police and say, listen, I believe my partner and I need counseling. Can we can you initiate some counseling for myself and my partner? And we will make the necessary referrals. So our job is always to help persons because they are in a relationship. And the problem is not just the relationship, the problem is the abuse. So they will always want to remain in a relationship, but they don't want the abuse to be perpetrated. So we do help persons to meet the necessary referrals so that they can get the necessary help. In terms of justice, which you spoke about earlier, um, that is not our role. We have other stakeholders, such as the Director of Public Prosecution, who prosecute these cases in court, and the magistrate, or if the matter reach before the High Court, the judge will do the necessary sentencing that is required. So even though um, we may see persons get back together, we should not be in a position to have that as a concern for us to say, okay, we've done all of this, and this is what happened. Now these people are getting back together. Now, I believe personally that's a good sign for them to getting back together unless the abuse stops. So again, the counseling and all these services are needed for victims, especially so that they can understand the consequences of perpetrators' action, so that we don't have this repeating domestic violence on a daily basis. So I hope I answered that correctly. If there's anything else you need to know on that question, I can help, because you said a mouthful a while ago.
Yes, thank you very much, Inspector Bob, for that. And I like that you highlighted and you mentioned that physical violence, that's an aspect we can see on our loved ones, on the victims. We can see that part. But it's the emotional and the psychological aspect of it is what we have to be very mindful and cognizant, especially of that aspect of gender based violence. So thank you
just,
again,
just
Inspector
to
Bob.
just to
We're going
share,
to,
just to something I didn't answer to you a while ago, and you was trying to refer into what we call by law a protection order.
yes.
So victims or applicants can go before the High Court and apply for protection order. And what does that mean? So victims who are in domestic violence situations doesn't necessarily have to come to the police. They can go and apply for one of those type of order, so that they can get from the judge a protection against the perpetrator. Now, when that order has been issued by the judge, the perpetrator will be served by the bailiff for them to come before the judge for hearing. And a copy of that will be then forwarded to the police at various police stations, so that in the event that the perpetrator violates that court order, he or she can be arrested and charged and taken before the court. So sorry I did not highlight that. So that's a form of protection by persons can go before the court with the assistance of social development or family support to help them get the paperwork go through the court, so that they can get that form of protection. All right.
All right. And I think that is very important to note because I myself didn't know that you can go straight to the court and get that order issued. So thank you very much, Inspector Bob, for that mouthful. So now that we know what the police part of it, the law and other part of our protection entails, you're going to move right on to the legal aspect where we have attorney Stacey Abel, who's now going to present on her aspect of gender based violence using the legal perspective. So, Attorney Abel, you can go right ahead.
Good night, everyone. As indicated, my name is Miss Stacey Abel. I am a general practitioner in the British Virgin Islands. For most of my practice, one of the things that I got interested in most was dealing with family matters. I know Inspector Webb said a mouthful about things from the officers end, and as an attorney, unfortunately, most of the times I am the one that they come to see when these things don't work. And it is an unfortunate situation that a lot of the times these things don't work because then we have to get involved. Rhonda quite rightly said that we have violence against men just as much as we have it against women. The only issue is that most of the time it's women that you see, and the men tend to suffer in silence. And for some reason, I tend to hear all the men that are suffering in silence about all the unfair situations. I know that they stated that we're highlighting just um, three aspects of gender-based violence, but I do want to point out that the economic situation that definitely fuels a lot of the violence that some people might be experiencing, and then that leads to the psychological part of it. I believe the economic and the psychological aspect of it go hand in hand together. And a lot of people don't realize that that is a form of abuse, and so that is one of the reasons they remain. So while you may not be getting black eyes, while you may not have marks on your skin, psychologically you are suffering because you don't have a way out of the situation, simply because you don't have the economic means. That's one of the biggest thing I think that keeps a lot of people in the situation that they're in, not because they want to be there, but because they don't know a way out. And while we do have the institutions in place, again, a lot of them, like if they come to my office and and ask them questions, well, did you try social development, or did you try family support network, or did you try anything? And they would literally say to me, they didn't get any help and they don't know what to do. And so that's why they come to see a lawyer. Um, and at that point, because we're dealing with the law, if you're not physically being abused, that's where I would say the limitations in the law is. Because Inspector Bob just started touching about the um, protection order. That is the biggest weapon against domestic violence that we have in the BVI. Um, in terms of going to the different institutions to be rehoused or placements or anything, from my experience and from what I've had to deal with, it's very limited. Because if you want to get out of a situation today, you may be assisted for I they I stand to be corrected if the information has changed, but I know definitely up until last year or earlier this year, you if you're rehoused or if you're placed in a safe place or a shelter, it's only for a very limited amount of time. And then that person has to go right, that person either goes back to the situation where it becomes worse, or they then left to fend for themselves. And my question always is, how does 3 days help somebody who's in a bad situation for the last 5 years? Like they don't have anything. So it's a sad situation where I think this is where Inspector Bob was saying a lot of the time probably they don't know why these people end back up in these situations. It's because they literally have nowhere to go. There are people in the BVI who don't have family. They came here, they came to make a new life, and they ended up with a partner, and they thought that that partner was gonna be the best thing for them, and then it doesn't end up that way. And but they don't have anywhere to go. They can't go back home because they probably don't have the means to go back home, or for whatever reason they just can't leave. And sometimes, believe it or not, children get caught up in that because there are people. I've had situations where the females, they want to leave, but now the males are holding on to the children because they had babies with these people, and they're like, well, you're not going anywhere with my child, so now I have to stay in this situation because I don't want to leave my child. It's very, it's very touchy. It's a very touchy subject, and going to court sometimes isn't the best answer, because as I said, it's not a situation where even if you get the protection order, these people then don't have the resources to move on or to make a better life for themselves. And as we all know, the economic situation in the BVI at the moment seems to be at peak crisis time. Everybody is complaining. Everybody is trying to make it work the best that they can. A lot of people are having to find roommates or whatnot. But as I said, I think that that is a big factor that's being overlooked in a lot of these situations. People literally just don't have anywhere to go. And it's not only the females that will be being held in these situations. We have men who will be held in these situations too. Um, and again, because men like to think they're macho, and they'll be like, I want to suffer in silence. But you would be surprised about the horror stories that men really have about what's going on behind closed doors. And sometimes I have to be like, we have people who really try to raise gentlemen, who try to raise a good guy, and they're trying their best to do what they were taught. But then you honestly have some females who take advantage of that fact. At one point, I honestly, and this is just my opinion because it's what I had to deal with, I honestly felt like the domestic violence act, the protection order, I felt like it was being weaponized against men because they're coming to court with one story. They get the protection order. You now have a protection order against you where, and then the men are literally bringing me their phones and showing me that the woman is still contacting them. The woman is still asking them, when you coming over, when you don't come back home, man, I wasn't serious. And I'm like, sir, you have to remember, she doesn't have a protection order against her. You do. She can call your phone all she wants, but the minute you answer that text, please understand that you have already breached that order, and she can then take that to the police station and say, see, look, he texting me, he's still harassing me. And I had to teach men how to protect themselves against these type of behaviors, because if it is that you're already in a bad situation and you can't get the help, because at this point, as I said, the protection order is in place for the victim, and that is not the man. So if you go to the police station and you say, the woman texting me, the reality is the police can't really do anything about it, because they can't go and tell her stop. There's no restriction against her. The restriction is not against her. The restriction is against the man. So it kind of created a situation where the abuse was perpetrated because you did me wrong. I got a protection order against me, and I'm still being treated unfairly after the fact. So there was still a lot of work to be done in cleaning it up on both ends. Um, and so that from my part, if I couldn't assist, or if I didn't feel that going to court was the best way, I would try my best to just teach guys, just educate them on the law, what to do best in the situation, how to protect themselves against getting in any more trouble, because you're already in a bad situation. There's nothing you can do. The best thing you can try to do is keep yourself out of it, because protection orders, they do have limitations. You can get one for 3 months, you could get one for 6 months, I think you could get one for 9 months, you could get one for 12 months. I think the highest it goes up to is 18 months. Oh, I'm sorry, not 18 months. I think it goes up to 3 years, I believe, is the highest. So it all depends. And then afterwards, you get people coming and they're asking, okay, what to do when it's expired? Because people literally wait until the protection order expired, and then they're ready to get back together again. And I'd be like, well, that would be a decision for you. I really can't tell you what to do in situations like that. But I will say that while there are very, very serious cases of domestic violence in the BVI, I'm glad that the topic did highlight the fact that it's not just against women and children. Men, honestly, have been having a hard time. And because they feel as though they're not getting the care and attention. So I'm glad that Inspector Bob said that his officers are being trained to take every reported case seriously, because as I said, that's the way they end up in my office, because I went to the police and the police is not taking me seriously, or the police attends the scene, the man called the for the police, and the police end up listening to the woman. And then some men have actually found themselves, they have to be the one who, I called you to the house, and yet I was the one who ended up having to leave the house. So it's it's very tricky, but going the route of court all the time isn't always the best thing. Sometimes you have to kind of just take a step back and deal with it um, in a common sense way, and in what's best for you. And the unfortunate things about victims in domestic violence is that sometimes they can't see clear. That's just the reality. They can't see clear, and they need a little outside help in order to help them to see clear. And that's normally where I would come in. I would just kind of talk them through it, educate them on what the law, what their rights are, what's available to them, and see what's the best option for them so that they could take it from there. But yes, that's all I wanted to highlight, that well, yes, there's physical, there's emotional, but we do need to acknowledge that economical plays a very huge part of the gender-based violence that may be taking place in the BVI.
Attorney Abel, thank you very much for that. And I like that you mentioned several times over your presentation that education is key. It is important to know our rights as men and women, as victims, know what your rights are, because the perpetrators, they know what they are about. They know what their intentions are. So therefore, we must know who we are, what we want, and educate ourselves on this critical issue that is plaguing our society. Now we're going to move right on to our next speaker. That's Dr. Tompkinson from Family Support Network, who would shed some light on gender-based violence. Dr. Tompkinson, you may take it away.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Tompkins, and I provide counseling services for the Family Support Network. And I'm excited to be here today to discuss gender-based violence. And I want to thank both Mrs. BVI and WINBVI in this partnership to unite our voices to bring awareness of what's going on here in our beautiful Virgin Islands, particularly for this month, the month of October, for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So
I said it the first second, but when the officer said
I think
Tompkinson,
someone else,
I said, well, like
I
Tompkinson,
think
so
my mic
I
is
said it
unmuted.
wrong.
I hear someone else speaking. Okay, thank you. So the Family Support Network, BVI, is a nonprofit, non-governmental organization, and the goal is, and our aim is, to aid individuals and couples and families that are impacted and affected by domestic violence. And really, we want to reduce and ultimately eradicate domestic violence in the Virgin Islands. And so I want to just speak briefly about the psychological impact of specifically domestic violence, and just to remind those that when there's a pattern of abuse, it occurs between both partners or sometimes even family members because they're trying to gain power and gain control. So that can take the form of physical or sexual, psychological, emotional, there's verbal, and even financial or economic abuse that can take place. So just bear that in mind. And I liked how the other speakers indicated that it's not just the women or the females, but also the men. And it goes across all different types of families and races and cultures, even religions or income levels. This is pervasive in many aspects of our society. So it's important to keep that in mind as we go through this presentation, because we tend to think it's just the men against the women. Some of the warning signs is that typically in the beginning stages of the relationship, the person that's perpetrating the violence, they behave themselves, they're romantic, but over time, we see that the behavior begins to change because he's trying now to get, or she or he is trying to get control of the person. And there's also like what they call a three distinct phases of the cycle. There's the tension, there's the explosion, and then there's the honeymoon phase. And oftentimes the honeymoon phase, the person tries to convince him to stay in the relationship after the abuse takes place. And they promise that they're never going to do it again. They're so sorry, but over time, the abuse continues to happen. And unfortunately, the victim begins to blame themselves, and the person that perpetrates it never takes responsibility. And it's such a sad thing They don't want to take ownership of what happens to them. So it's important to realize that they don't take responsibility. They blame maybe drugs or alcohol or stress at work, never realizing that they are the problem. And a lot of times you can't convince them. You can't convince them that they're the problem. But let me be clear that no one deserves to get hit, excuse me, and abuse should not be tolerated or excused or even minimized. So some examples of the power of control could be psychological, it could be emotional abuse, again, physical, sexual, even financial. And just to break that down a little bit further, in terms of the control of psychological, what happens is they become very extremely jealous. These are signs that they're trying to exert control and power over them. A lot of times they'll have frequent demands of where are you? What's your location? There's name calling. There's even hitting, destroying, and sometimes even hiding their personal belongings, putting them down. Even public humiliation. Again, that's the control they're trying to get. They're trying to exert from a psychological or emotional aspect. And of course, the physical aspect, there's hitting, there's punching, there's kicking. Sometimes even withholding medication is actually a form of abuse. A lot of times they're attempting to force persons to have a miscarriage or even threaten them with weapons. And so it's important to understand these are some of the signs in terms of the control. And of course, there's the actual sexual abuse in terms of forcing persons sometimes even to commit prostitution or even getting to exotic dancing. Again, that's the power and control they try to have over their victim. And sometimes even having cruel or unusual acts that they're not used to accustomed to. Excuse me. And then there's the abuse in terms of the financial or the economic abuse, forcing persons to work under the table or even taking all their money that they've earned. Okay, so again, they're trying to exert the power. So somebody asks, so why would someone stay in that kind of relationship? Why would they stay? Well, as persons mentioned earlier, there are various reasons. There's the financial dependency. Sometimes they stay for the sake of the children. They stay because they don't want to break up the family. They're at least someone's there for the children. Another reason why they may stay is that they have family pressure. The person may act one way in front of the family, but at home, they're a totally different person. And then there's also, let's not forget about it, there's religious pressure to stay sometimes. We convince the person to stay for the sake of the marriage and just take the abuse and do quote unquote God's work. And a lot of times people stay because of social isolation. They don't want to be ashamed or humiliated. So we shouldn't ask the question why they're staying. Really, we should ask them, do they actually have a problem? Are you being victimized? Ask them the question point blank. Because a lot of times the question assumes that if you leave, they're going to be safe. And a lot of times they're not safe when they leave. And realizing that this is not just a family issue, as was stated earlier, it's actually a societal problem. Okay. And now the effects of the domestic violence can be physically, it can be emotional, it can be spiritual, it can be in terms of mental health, and it even impacts the children. So some of the physical effects of domestic violence are the bruises around the eyes, purple and red marks on their neck. Sometimes they even have sprained or broken wrists. They have sometimes chronic fatigue or even a shortness of breath. And it can impact their sexual activity. They feel like they have a dysfunctional in terms of their sexuality. So that's some of the physical effects in terms of domestic violence. And then you have, of course, the mental health effects of it in terms of some persons suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, including flashes, nightmares, and uncontrollable thoughts sometimes. And of course, they have depression or anxiety, and even in terms of low self-esteem, it impacts them in a very deep way. And persons sometimes, because of the abuse, they tend to abuse alcohol or drugs or other substances just to try to kill the pain. Of course, in terms of emotions, they feel hopeless, they feel unworthy, and a lot of times they don't know why it's taking place. And they may feel unmotivated. And people think they're lazy, but they're not. It's really the impact of the domestic violence. In addition, as someone said earlier, it impacts the children. Children who witness these forms of violence, sometimes they're anxious. They suffer from depression. And of course, it impacts their schoolwork academically. And of course, in terms of the socialization, they develop now in a certain way that they feel that this may be normal. So a lot of times we're training our children how to treat their spouses or their significant others. And so for those who need help, we have services like FSN. And if you need to contact us, the number you can call is 542-2085. That's the general number. But if you're in an emergency, we want you to call 911. We want you to call the police. Call them first if you're in an emergency situation. But then if you want support, you can call the crisis line that we have at FSN, and that number is 499-0999. So that's my presentation for tonight. I wanted to kind of shed some light on some of the impact that domestic violence has from a psychological, emotional, and economic perspective. And really, it's all of our responsibility to be aware of this particular violence. It's not, again, not just a family issue, but it is, in fact, a societal issue. Thank you very much. And that's my presentation for tonight. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Dr. Tompkins, your presentation was well done, and thank you for shedding light on this issue. Now, I totally agree when you said that many times we think that it is just our significant other, our spouse or boyfriend, girlfriends that inflict harms on the victims, but often it might be another family member to another family member who's looking for that form of control. You may have a friend who you call your friend is inflicting such harm or abuse on another friend, looking for that form of control. So the victim should always know the person who is on the receiving end of this, and we should always be cognizant of your rights. Identify these signs. What is happening? How are you feeling? Are you being yourself? Know yourself so that when these things are happening and you feel out of yourself, you're not feeling too well, you are concerned, look for these signs to see, is this happening to you? Then turn to the proper institutions which can assist you in getting better, seeking help, and becoming your better self. So we have some questions from the public. We have one for Inspector Bob, and I see this is a repeated question that the public has. What are some measures that you're taking as a force to educate the public on key laws or the rights and the legislations of your rights as a person? So again, this is a repeated question. So besides educating your officers, are there any other strategies or tactics that you take to bring awareness to the community? Do you go into the schools? What do you do to assist in this endeavor?
Rather than educating or sensitizing my colleagues, I do go out within the public, churches, the public and private sectors. I can remember just after 2011 up to 2012, there were a lot of sensitization that was carried out where the law is concerned. I was co-hosting with the gender coordinator at the time, Mrs. Laura Connor, when the law was established. And we did a lot of sensitization with the public, churches, the private sector, into the schools, primary and secondary. And I do other training in the areas of social services, the education department, and so forth, to let people know that what the legislation says, what the law says, and what the protocols are when it comes to these type of matters.
All right. A continuation on that
And
same topic,
ongoing.
on that.
And it's still ongoing.
Okay, my apologies. A continuation on that same point that you made. What about some wellness programs? How can you guys help, or how do you guys help families? And if the other stakeholders wish to chime in and share on that question, so what are some things that you can do to assist families in situations even after it happens? So after they have come to you, they've complained. What are some ways in which you assist them after the fact? I think that may have been touched a little bit upon, but just to refresh your memories, can you please tell us?
Based on your question, I don't think it's a good practice for the police to involve in form of support. And when I said support, in terms of getting friendly and comfortable, whether it's victims or perpetrator, because our job is primarily to deal with crime. So what we normally do is make referrals to the other stakeholders, such as family support network, to provide the services that are available to assist in terms of, as I said, housing, food, or shelter. Because if the police get caught up in those sort of other services rather than just the crime, um, there can be certain conflict of interest between the police and the victims and the perpetrator where allegations can be made. So it's not a practice for us to get involved in other services rather than just dealing with the crime. So we try our best not to get caught up in those areas, but make referrals to the other agencies where those services are provided, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes. Thank you, Inspector Bob, for that. Now on to Miss Abel. Finance is usually a presenting challenge for victims. You also mentioned that. What systems are available for such persons? That was also a question that I had that I wrote down. What are some things that you think maybe also the government can do, we as a community can do to assist persons afterwards? Because as we know, and you mentioned our finances, that person's finance can be an issue. So, what can we do as a government, as a community? It's a community issue, so therefore, it should be a community effort. What can we do to assist victims?
I would say honestly, the first thing you need is a place for these people to go. It makes no sense for me to be trying to come out of a situation and I literally don't have anywhere to go for whatever reason. Maybe your family can't take you in. Maybe you don't have any family here. Some people sometimes sometimes the embarrassment of the situation keeps them from reaching out to anybody. So it's not only a prison in their home, it's a prison in their mind. So I think the first and most important thing that would need to be put in place is an actual designated place for for them to go. Like when people I know in the US, sometimes with people coming out of rehab or whatever, they have halfway houses. They have places where you have to retrain this person to either stand on their own 2 feet or give them a safe haven to come out of they're coming out of a situation where they're not trusting of a lot of people. I think that's one of the biggest things that we don't have here, and we that would be the first thing you need to put in place. I don't know whether, and I know I dealt with some persons, and I believe that, as I said, FSN would try to place them, but it wasn't for very long. I'm not sure about the financial aspect of it. I don't think it was much at the time either. I don't know if that's something that's changed at this point or if it's still the same. But you do need you have to meet people where they are. You can't just pat me on the back and say, okay, I'm sorry that happened to you, or hey, go to the police, call the police, and then I'm left outside. I need somewhere to go and I need provision. So that's the biggest challenge in the community. And then I think I had a thought one time. I was at a restaurant, I can't remember, and one of the things that I know is that a lot of restaurants waste a lot of food. A lot of restaurants waste a lot of food at the end of the day. um, and I believe that that can be utilized. I believe that they can partner with different organizations and because it takes money to run anything. So if you don't identify a building where you can house these people, the next thing you're gonna be faced with is what are they going to eat? It takes resources, and as you rightly said, the community is meant to come together. These things should be important because if we have healthy people in the community, then
Definitely.
I believe that the crime rate will go down because unhealthy people in our community, it doesn't do anybody any good. It makes an impact on the children that you're growing up seeing. It makes an impact on your neighbor, everybody. So it would be a community effort, and these are some of the things that I think people should really, really sit down and seriously consider whether or not it has to be a decision where the government has to whichever department it needs to go through. But these are a couple of the things that I just sat down and identified, and I thought that if these two things would come together, shelter and the provision of food, I believe that we would see a whole lot of people coming forward, trying to better their lives, trying to find a way out of the situations, and then we can help have people like the good doctor that would then come in and give them the tools to start rebuilding their life. But I don't know how far we have gotten along the journey in terms of making that happen. I know persons visit social development and I know they visit family support network. I know that sometimes, unfortunately, that's not enough. And so the cycle continues, unfortunately.
Yes, I totally agree. The cycle continues because, as a community, again, we need to come together. Let us foster a safe haven for these victims. We have work to do, so let us do it. And as you said, broken families, then we have broken children, and the cycle goes on and on and on. Okay. Dr. Tompkins, I have a question for you from the public. How about persons experiencing abuse before they become adults? I think you touched on that a little bit, but just tell us the importance of this here so that we as adults know the kind of example that we need to be, the kind of example we need to set. We know that crimes are on the rise and the majority of them are being done by young people. The young people are getting antsy and getting into trouble and fights. How is this impacting our youths even before they become adults? And again, having the cycle of gender based violence going on.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and unfortunately, I see many persons who are adults who have experienced the abuse, as you stated, um, from childhood. Um, the challenge is sometimes that they don't even recognize or they don't even remember that they were abused sometimes. And it's not until we get into deep therapy that they begin to unpack these deep seated memories that they have. So it's important if they're going to deal with it. First of all, they have to kind of recognize that they have been abused and recognize the signs. Um, because what happens is when you're young, as you get older, these things begin to come out. It comes out in your personality. It comes out in how you interact with others. It comes out how you do business. So recognize these different signs that you may have been abused when you were younger. And for those who do remember, now it's time to get some help, get some healing. And unfortunately, there's a stigma, a great stigma surrounding mental health. They think that if you go to see a therapist, that you're quote unquote crazy, right? However, it's probably one of the best things you can do because we're trained to help you walk through the process of healing psychologically, emotionally. So once you get into the sessions, we begin to unravel those deep-seated abuse and memories, begin to unfold the things you experience, and begin to process them to begin to actually tell your story. Because actually within your story now, you begin to heal. And you'll be surprised who other person you may be able to impact to heal. But the one thing you shouldn't really do is overly identify with that trauma. Recognize what it is, acknowledge it, but now begin coping skills to overcome it and begin to function more normally according to who you are in society. So yes, we do see it throughout society. We see our children who see the abuse, and they see us adults acting in a certain way. So they mimic that behavior because children, they don't really do what we say, they do what we do. They're just mimicking us, unfortunately. So we as an adults, we have to begin to recognize our own interaction, recognize our own abuse towards each other, and that will positively impact the children. So it's a cycle that we have to consciously begin to break down within society.
All right. So your point on therapy leads me to the next question from our public. How receptive are persons to therapy here in the Virgin Islands? It's a small community. As you say, persons might think that it's odd or weird that they should seek a therapist. Have you encountered a lashback? How receptive are persons? Are they open to it? What are your views on how the public feels about therapy?
Sure, I do feel that we've come a long way, and persons are embracing it more than before. However, there's still a great stigma. I was doing a training the other day, and I asked persons in terms of mental health, and people were kind of like, "Well, yeah," but they don't want to say anything publicly, right? Whereas if they had maybe a broken arm or a broken leg, they'll be more open to discuss it. But when you talk about a broken spirit, or when your psyche has been tampered with, persons are now kind of hesitant to share because they feel it's a weakness. So fortunately, because of social media, it is becoming more popular. We see the younger generation, they're becoming more accepting of it. But we still have some way to work, and especially after our tragic storms of 2017. We saw that during that time there was a need to begin to deal with our psychological impact of the storm. Then, of course, we had the pandemic where we were socially isolated, and then persons needed contact. We need socialization. That's part of who we are. So again, I see it getting better, but we still have a long way to go in terms of persons being normalized and being able to accept the fact that it's okay, to have a therapist. Some people think it's cool, but we still have a long way to go.
Okay. Family Support Network, you're representing that institution at the moment. You guys collaborate with other agencies to bring awareness. What are some of the other agencies that you guys work along with in order to foster a safe environment, a safe place for such victims?
Right. So, of course, FSN, as I said before, is a nonprofit organization, but we do try to collaborate with other organizations to bring awareness. Sometimes, they collaborate with WINBVI like we're doing now, or sometimes with Rotary clubs. But we do try to get a basis for the community to help, because you can do more with more. And so if we can have more collaboration, that would be greatly appreciated. And we're actually open to collaboration. So, if you feel that there's a cause you want to help and you want to be a partner with us as we address domestic violence, please contact us. We'll be happy to partner with you.
Okay, as I asked Miss Ava earlier, what are some things that we as a community can do to assist and foster these persons, help them feel safe? What are some recommendations you would give to the public on how we can assist?
You said me specifically?
Yes, after
Okay.
the 3 days are up and persons are now back with their families or resources have run out, what are some ways in which the community can come on board? For example, sometimes you might hear the family support network, they are low on food, you need contributions. What are some initiatives that you think we can do or you would recommend as a community to get involved, lend a helping hand?
Yes, certainly. So I think a couple of things. One, I believe we have to come together to advocate for the needs of our community. And so I think your biggest voice is that of collaboration, and we need to approach the powers that be and say, listen, we need some resources for this particular problem. The challenge is that there's no economic incentive really to do that, because what you're doing now is you're being proactive, right? And so I would encourage persons to speak to their local representative and tell them, listen, we need to get together and add more resources to this population. And then I think talks like this are crucial, normalizing the fact that this does happen, and let's now begin to address it. Let's not act like it doesn't happen. Let's be truth about it. Let's speak truthfully about it, and also allow us to come together as a community to address the issue. Let's not hide from it, right? And that's why I think that if we can collaborate even with the churches to bring awareness. I was doing a lot of talks last year in many different church settings to bring awareness of domestic violence. And I think if we begin in those levels and on societal level, we can actually make an impact. So I think if we come together as one, we can have a great impact on it.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Tompkins. So, for each stakeholder, I'm just going to give you a few minutes, 1 minute or so, to give your final words, your final remarks, final encouragement for persons out there who are scorned by this societal scourge. So, I'll begin with you, Inspector Bob.
Um, what I will continue to say is that when you become a victim of domestic violence, it's important that you let someone know. Whether or not you want to make a report to the police, let someone know. There are other stakeholders involved that you can go to. You heard of Dr. Tompkinson, who works at Family Support Network. You heard of Stacey Abel, attorney. You can go to her, ask her for any assistance. She may not send you a bill, depends on how she. But there are agencies out there who can assist you and bring you to a place where you feel more comfortable. But if you keep it inside and you're not saying anything to no one and you suffer from abuse, the results can be serious consequences. The Family and Juvenile Unit is a sensitive unit within the RVIPF that you can come to and have those conversations so that your matter can be dealt with expeditiously and taken before the court, and make sure that justice being served for whatever perpetrated abuse perpetrated use against you. So please call us, report the matter. Our numbers are 311-311, non-emergency. You can reach out for immediate help, as the police is the only agency who can safeguard you and protect you in immediate needs. All the other agencies are just providing other services that are necessary for you. What I was also say, because this will be my last time to speak, we speak a lot about shelter, and I think it's about time that we, as a territory, reach to that stage where we can see a shelter, a place where we can have victims of domestic violence to be housed when these things happen. Most domestic violence matters happens in the night when everyone is sleeping. And when the police respond, we need to take victim to a safe place, whether by a shelter or if they want to go to a family member or friend, temporary, or whatever choices they make, we respect that. But I think it's a highly about time that we get a shelter for victims. I will also like to see we reach to the stage that we have what we call a family court, a court where we deal with all cases of gender-based violence, because it's not just domestic violence. Child abuse is a form of domestic violence, sexual assault. And sometimes within the system, these cases stay along very, very long before, justice can be solved. So if we have a family court, we can deal with all these sort of perpetrated violence against persons so that justice can be solved in the most appropriate time. So again, we are here to help. We are here to serve, and don't be afraid. My job is to continue to partner with all stakeholders or agencies so that we can bring this thing to arrest, this epidemic, gender-based violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Inspector Bob. So, I'll take it right over to you, Attorney Abel.
Hi. Well, my final thoughts for the night is that I would say, true, don't be afraid. I know that most victims, for whatever, it's an embarrassing thing. but I always say it's more embarrassing for the perpetrator to be behaving like that, because if that's the best way that you know how to behave, then I don't think that the victim should take on that shame. So I always tell people to speak up, regardless of what it is, regardless of what you think people might think. It's your life, and they're not the ones that are living with the consequences. They're not the ones living with the thoughts. They're not the ones living with the emotions. They're not the ones living with the scars. So say something. There's always somebody you can say something to. The saying goes, you may have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find a prince. You may have to talk to a lot of people before somebody actually take, but say something, especially men. Say something. There's always help. There's always somebody that can listen. There's always somebody with an idea. So don't suffer in silence. I think we said it earlier, when you suffer in silence, it just empowers these people to continue doing it. I know people in our community who have perpetrated violence on a number of people simply because the one person got away and they kept silent. They never said why they left. The next person went into it and they got the violence, and it just kept going on and on. Say something, name them and shame them. The shame is not yours, it's theirs. So speak up. Regardless of what you think, speak up and try to get the help that you need.
Very well said. Name them and shame them. I like that. So over to you, Dr. Tompkins, for your final words to the general public.
Thank you. And my final words would be, if you are a victim of this domestic violence or gender based violence, please realize that it's not your fault. Okay? Try your best not to take it on. It's not your fault. And please cry out for help. Don't keep it to yourself, because, as others stated, there is help for you. Again, if you want to contact FSN, the general number is 542 2085. But if you're in an emergency, call 311 911, call the police. But then if you need some support from FSN, you can call the crisis line at 499-0999. We offer services such as counseling, some temporary shelter, and some crisis intervention. But if you're actually in the community and you see persons suffering, say something. And the part of the challenging part is, we know the persons sometimes that are doing this to other members of their family, to their partners, to their spouses. And we need to speak up. We need to say something if we see something, okay? Try to help them, listen, give them advice. If you see something's happening, acknowledge their feelings. Don't pressure and leave at the moment. Try to develop a plan, because remember, they might not even identify as a victim of domestic violence, but realize that they need help. But if you see something, please say something. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Tompkins. So, just to close off, I want to again reiterate that domestic violence is not just an issue that affects us here in the Virgin Islands. It is so broad and wide that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for 2030 has had 5 of their goals geared towards gender based violence. Those goals are goal number 3, which speaks about good health and well being. Goal number 5, which speaks about gender equality. There you have the name itself. We have goal number 8, which speaks about decent work and economic growth. Goal number 10, which speaks about reducing inequalities. And goal number 16, which speaks about peace, justice, and strong institutions. So I am Rhonda Victor Pinnock, your Mrs. British Virgin Islands Globe, your WIN ambassador, and I pledge to help this global issue bring some light to it. So I am a part of this sustainable development plan that the United Nations has. And I want to encourage all of you. Let's shed light, bring awareness, encourage someone who you know, tell someone if you're going through something, be a support system. Again, thanks to Unite BVI, who has lent a great helping hand along with the WINBVI team in collaboration and being a part of this great initiative. Thank you very much for listening and have a wonderful evening.